Morning again. Again, we want to welcome you to Kingswood Church, and as you saw in that video, that's just a little sample of what we were able to do, not only in Guatemala, but there at the end, we had a couple pictures from our trip just this past weekend to Rockford, Illinois. So, as I talked about earlier, we're actually going to do things a little bit differently this morning. We're going to have people get up from the different trips that we went on to talk about a story and how that helped them understand more of who God is and what God's love looks like. But before we do that, I just want to talk briefly about the passage that Brooke read from 1 Corinthians 13. So where do we typically hear this passage read? Weddings, right. Okay, this is like the passage is usually always there. And it does, I think, apply to that because it talks about patience and kindness. And if you talk to my wife, she requires patience and kindness with me. That's part of the whole deal. But it talks about injustice and it doesn't keep a record of wrong and isn't arrogant, and all those things are true. But I think the interesting thing is it is read at weddings, but Paul was never married. So his original intention wasn't for this necessarily to be read at a wedding all the time, even though that is a space that we obviously do that. So Paul is writing, as you may already know, to the church in Corinth. But it wasn't just to go to the church in Corinth. These letters, he would write them. A lot of times he's in jail or on house arrest, and he'll write a letter and have someone deliver it to the church there. And then that church kind of cycles around to other churches in that area, and it becomes bigger and bigger into these other areas in which Christians were living in. And so he's writing this to these Christians, saying the greatest thing, there at the end you hear, the greatest things of hope, faith, and love is love. That we need to be focused on, again, what is God? God is love. And so we need to be focused on those things. And Paul knew that these Christians were going to be brought with some difficult times. And for those who don't know, the Romans weren't the kindest to Christians, especially when they first started. And so Paul knew that their focus needed to be on love. That in fact, when we're in the midst of other Christians and other people, and especially people who don't know Jesus, that love, we need to lead by example, that love is patient, that love is kind, that love doesn't keep records of wrong, that love isn't arrogant. And so I think when we talk about Mission Sunday and how we serve and love people and how we build sacred community, this passage is so very important because it shows us, especially in that second paragraph there, that love is patient, love is kind, it's not jealous, it doesn't brag, it's not arrogant, it isn't rude, it doesn't seek its own advantage. It shows us that Paul really lays out what love is. So I'm excited, and you may be too, because now I'm done talking. Our first person is going to be Nick Good, so I want to invite Nick forward at this moment. He's super excited.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Nick Good, and I'm here to speak about our mission trip to Guatemala. This is my second mission trip and my first time visiting a foreign country. Going into this trip, I had many different feelings and expectations about going to Guatemala, some negative and some positive. When I finally arrived in Guatemala, I was surprised to see how many things were similar to back home. However, some things were completely different. I was not sure if I could adjust to not drinking from the tap and the very different plumbing situation. As the week went on, I grew more comfortable. I started like this. Eventually, as the days went on, we made our way to Friday, the day all of us finished our second stoves, and the day of our party. As we all wrapped up our second stoves, it meant that we had time to go play with the kids. My house didn't have many kids, so I went to this field where many other people from our trip were already playing. There was just a field and a basketball court. It was eye-opening to see how the kids didn't care how much or how little they had, and how they made it work and were still able to have fun. In comparison, we have parks with fancy equipment, skate parks, tennis, volleyball, and even basketball courts, and much more. Most American kids take all these things for granted and most of the time don't even use it. I can guarantee that if those kids were here and had what we had, they would be using it 24/7. After a couple of hours of playing with the kids, it was finally time for our party. At the end of our time in Santa Teresita, All the women who we made our stoves for threw us a party, which in itself is nice because they took their time out of their day to set the party up, make us treats, and rehearse dances for our performance. The party started off with several women giving us a dance performance and even calling some of us up to dance with them, and some of us taking up kids from outside to dance. That went on for about 45 minutes. After that, we were called up one by one and were presented with a bag, which were homemade, I think. Then, we gave each of the women gifts to go with their stoves. Finally, we had cupcakes, which were also homemade. Then we gave all of our Masons gifts as well. It was so fun to end the week on such a fun note. So in the end, this trip was one of the most transformational things I've ever done. From seeing how different their lives were from ours, to seeing such a tight-knit community as Santa Teresita, and overall, seeing how much we did affected these people's lives in such a positive way. In this trip, I was able to use the skills I've learned from this church about being accepting of change and helping others to make a positive mark in Guatemala. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I want to invite Libby Dungan up next to share her story.
Hi, I'm Libby. I had the opportunity to go on the second trip to Guatemala. Despite both my mother and my brother going to Guatemala multiple times before, I still didn't know quite what to expect when I got down there. So I tried to notice everything. So here are some statistics I found. I ate 25 tortillas and 7 ice cream cones. I got 5 mosquito bites, and I helped build 2 stoves while personally breaking 0 cinder blocks. I can't say the same for some people on the trip. And then one day we counted 112 dog sightings. I could go on with a couple other numbers, but it turns out the best parts of the trip, the parts most important to notice, couldn't be captured with numbers, because we had countless conversations and countless connections and relationships. And as you can see from some of those photos, we gave countless stickers to the kids. The week was filled with small but important moments. Some of my favorites included playing games with the kids like Pato Pato Gallo or Duck Duck Rooster. We didn't know the name for goose in Spanish. Or mixing cement with the kids at the houses we worked at. But although I could stand here and take hours talking about each child and telling cute stories about all of them, we do have a luncheon to get to, so I have to pick one story. And as I sat down to think of that one story, I realized the most impactful story from the trip, or one of the most impactful stories from the trip, surprisingly didn't have any children involved with it. On the ride back to our hotel after our last workday, and after the party that Nick described, we were driving with 3 of our Masons, Peen, Pedro, and Oscar. I personally hadn't worked with any of the 3 throughout the whole week. But I found us all, with the leadership of Lauren, encouraging them to sing a song for us, which they had sang for a couple people earlier in the week. As they started to sing, I didn't know a single word of the song they sang, but I was able to piece together one line from my limited Spanish knowledge. I don't completely remember what that line was, just that it was something about when you raise your hands, presumably to God, anything is possible. But the translation is not the important part. They shared a part of their lives with us that night, and we shared back with them by badly belting out One Direction and Bon Jovi. I felt a connection with 3 people that I had never spoken to before, that I didn't even speak their same language. And that had been happening with multiple people in multiple situations throughout the whole week. I even found connections with people that I have known for years, but never really talked to. I was asked how this brought me closer to God, but if I'm being honest, there were times that week that I forgot for a moment I was there for a church trip. I forgot the Bible message that we read for the morning lectio. Sorry, Lauren. And I forgot that in a couple of days, I'd be back here speaking to all of you. But I realized I wasn't thinking about God because I was thinking about the people right in front of me. And that's where God is in every person that you see and meet and talk to. By becoming closer to strangers we met, I became closer to God and how we are meant to act, not with an obligation to do good or with the mission to spread God's word, but with a genuine interest and connection to people around us. On this trip, Candace taught us to approach each situation with a mentality to learn rather than to help, and that's what I hope I bring back here. I want to thank everyone for their contribution to these trips, because without it, I would have never been able to met Peen, Pedro, or Oscar, or any of the other children we played with. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lauren Misek, so let's welcome her now.
Hello, I am Lauren Misek, and this is my fourth mission trip. You know, I've been on quite a few now, and I would even consider myself to be a seasoned veteran, or sorts. But none of my trips could have possibly prepared me for Guatemala. My older brother, Ryan, who is passionate about quite a few things in life, really advocated for me to go on this trip, and having him say that if he was able to go back to Guatemala, he would have, really made me really excited for this trip. I've learned quite a few things from my trip for Guatemala, and I've decided to tell 3 stories that really capture what I've learned. The first one is when we first went into the village and we were trying to introduce ourselves to the children, and with all of our very limited Spanish knowledge, we really asked them 2 questions. What are your names? And how old are you? And they would ask us the same back. And at some point in time, my friend Emma thought it'd be really funny to be like, oh, well, Lauren is loca. She's crazy. And so after that, we noticed that the children were having quite a bit of problems trying to say my name, and all of a sudden, my name turned into Loca. Not that I was crazy, but that was my name. And so then the children were going all around the village going, oh my goodness, that's Loca, that's Loca. And the best part is that then one of the kids goes, Loca en la mente. She's mentally crazy. But it was amazing. It spread like wildfire. At that point, after about 15 minutes, I didn't even have a chance to change my name back to Lauren. It was Loca for the rest of the trip. And what I thought was going to be maybe a bit annoying or crazy or whatever it was, ended up being one of my favorite parts of the trip. I would walk down the streets, and children that I had never seen before would point and whisper to their friend, like, there's Loca. And I would leave my work site just to go to lunch, and all of a sudden I had a ton of children running at me. It was almost like I felt like a rock star in the village. But it was amazing to me that the children could really just accept me like that, and they would love me so unconditionally, practically, for not even knowing me. I was a complete stranger with the literally crazy name. The children in that village and all of their families, my homeowners and I definitely had a great laugh after it, because I had to, with my very limited knowledge of Spanish, explain to them, oh, it's not my name, it's like a nickname, kind of, but they just would laugh it off, laugh at me, whatever it was. But everyone in the village, the children, they taught me laughter and joy. My family and my Masons, with my 2 family members falling ill on the trip, their immune systems not totally working as well as my father and I, the superior of the family. We just had to switch up the groups a little bit, and I had the honor of working with both Chino and Araldo, and with Maddie Piggott as my partner, the 2 of us were not the most skilled of the group, I'll give us that, and we were with the big guy, Araldo, okay? And Araldo and our family would probably spend more time laughing at us than they did anything else, because we tried our best, really we did, but it didn't always work out the way that we wanted it to. My second family, sat outside and watched Maddie and I like hawks. We probably had an audience of at least 10 at all times. They were just so interested in what we were doing for them, and they were really passionate about getting their new stove. My Mason Araldo taught me more about stoves than I would ever hope to know, but more than that, he taught me more about life. He taught me about patience. He told me to go slower about 1,000,000 times, but for me, he was really just telling me to slow down. It was part of me feeling like I was just blowing through my life, and it was almost like Araldo was this calming voice that I needed that I didn't even know I needed. He taught me kindness and love. And lastly, on our last day, Libby spoke to it a little bit, but we talked with Candace about how we just don't want to say that we're helping, we just want to build. Candace asked our whole group what she thought we were going to say when we go back to the United States and tell people about our mission trip, and I guess part of me just opened up to her and I said, I don't like to say that I'm helping people on mission trips. I like to say that I'm building, because that is exactly what we're doing when we go on these. We are, of course, building stoves quite literally, but more than that, we're building connections and we're building a community and we're building family. I think that at some point in everyone's life, we wonder what else is out there in the world. I definitely wondered that before I went to Guatemala, and what I found was laughter, joy, kindness, love, and acceptance. Thank you.
Now I want to invite Rachel Rayburn.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Rayburn, and this was my second mission trip, I believe, but it was my first going to a foreign country, so it's very exciting. Going on this mission trip to Guatemala has been very life-changing for me. Everything that I saw and experienced there had changed my entire way of thinking. I am so much more grateful for what I have than I ever thought I could be. I would definitely have to say that out of all the experiences in Guatemala, there was one that brought me closer to God. And I realized much more how God provides us with daily needs, even when we don't have much. I would have to say that the one experience that brought me closer to God was when the community was all thanking us at the end of all of our work. They threw a party for us, and all the community and families were so sweet and hospitable to us the entire time, both then and on the work site. I enjoyed when they told us their stories of their families. It was so interesting to see how similar and different their stories were. And at the party, when we all danced and gave our gifts to the families and the Masons, we danced with the children from all the different families, and I had a wonderful time. And when they were showing us the dances from their culture, it was just amazing to watch and just see how different they are from us. And I remember how all the children of the community and the people in it were just so happy and so willing to help all the time. And I feel as though their happiness and hospitality brought me closer to God in terms of being thankful for what I have all the time and who I have in my life. I mean, think about it. How often do we take advantage of what we have or who we have in our lives? The families and children of Guatemala don't have much of anything, really. And they are just still so grateful and happy all the time with what they do have. We really don't see those kind of people every day. In fact, out here, it's really hard to see it. It's so rare. Sorry, I lost my place. At the end, when we all had to leave after the party and we were all saying our goodbyes, it was so hard. I mean, we only went there to start building the stoves, and we ended up making so many amazing, beautiful relationships. And all these relationships that we had made were ones that you would form with friends over so many years, or what it felt like anyway. When all the kids came up to us and started hugging us and thanking us for everything that we had done, it was just so hard to let go. And the more they kept hugging us, the harder it was to leave. Eventually, after we finally got them off of us, we got in the vans and started driving off. But there were some kids who decided they wanted to join our little excursion. So they jumped on the ladders on the vans and started driving away with us. And I looked at them and I was like, you can't do that. And they just stared right back at me. They didn't say anything. I was like, okay, you do what you want. And so after a while, when we got to the gate where we were exiting, they did eventually get off. But They did line up all the way down, and they were all waving goodbye to us, and it was the cutest thing ever. And they did also light some fireworks as we were leaving. They set off some firecrackers, and I swear it made me go deaf. But this entire trip has brought me closer to God because it made me feel as though you don't have to look very far in the things in life if you want them answered. Guatemala was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I could not be more glad that I went. I am so grateful for everyone who came on the trip, both on the first and the second trip, and I am so grateful for the relationships I've made with them. Thank you.
Cameron Obrecht. So let's welcome him now.
Oh, good morning. I'm Cameron Obrecht, and I was on the first of the two mission trips. I would like to focus on, rather than the entire trip, I was thinking of focusing on one particular day that I was working with my group of teammates on. We were all working on stoves, and with my group, it was kind of a neat little thing that happened. I think it was July 16th, the second hot day of work, the last with our first family. Marbila, the hostess of the hotel that we were staying at, insured us against exhaustion with her superb meals that she cooked, and we were well into learning how to make the stoves and everything. Our mason, Cesar, showed us how to cover the stove with a cement mixture, and that's pretty much what we did all that day. The family for whom we were building the stove, they gave us cokes, which is kind of a big deal there considering their unit of money, the quetzal, is worth much, much less than the US dollar, so it must have been a big deal to buy all the cokes they did. Probably around 2:30 p.m. or so, Cesar was putting a second piece of the chimney on top, and then a man approached us from the nearby town square, kind of, but I didn't notice him until he started talking. He thanked us profusely for our work, and he said that most groups that come from the United States, who come to the village to help them, are dentists and doctors and the kind of professionals, but they never work with construction like we were doing. I was able to understand most of what he said, and we struck up a conversation. His name was Minor, and he was an administrator at the school, the kind of person who has meetings with teachers and with kids as well. And I wasn't exactly sure, but I told my teammates, Brian and Dennis, what he was saying, and we even went as far as to make a joke with him. As he was about to leave us, he said he thought it was very special that we Americans have it in our culture to be so charitable, which I thought was very special of him to say, because this doesn't seem to be a common belief that we have of our own culture. You know, we might generalize that in our own modern U.S. culture that it's flawed with, you know, all the misleading schools of thought about how to do things and, you know, what's best. But it takes the eyes of a foreigner to really see a country and its people for what they are to the rest of the world. And according to them, we're not that bad. And it's kind of like it's impossible to know what the exterior of your house looks like without walking outside and talking to someone who's only seen the outside of your house. And according to Minor, this man who talked with us, the exterior of our American house of culture is prettier than we thought, more abundant, forgiving, and gracious, relieving to these people for whom it would be much harder to do what we did without us being there. Perhaps a bit more reminiscent of the house of God than we would imagine, but only they would know. And they would only have offered us the generous cokes that they did if they had felt decisive appreciation for us and our work. It is said that Jesus resides in each of us so that we might love each other and hear the word of God. And when this man Minor appeared, then so did Jesus. And God's word for us that day through him, as we knelt in the dirt working on the stove, almost as if kneeling at the feet of Jesus himself, it seemed to be most broadly that things are not always what they seem. And this kind of would mean like the difference between, you know, how we think of our own culture and how they think of our culture, and how, you know, they see it as different from how we see it. But even over the course of the whole trip, we observed how relatively little the people have here in general in Guatemala, but they couldn't be happier. They were all, you know, cheery, and there's a very tight sense of community there that it's hard to find in the States, it seems. But the community was so much more appreciative and much less given to general frustration than you might see in the U.S. You start to wonder who is really better off here. It may seem that God had endowed the United States with a higher valued currency, but it cannot ever equal the true happiness we felt around us in Guatemala. Our hands did God's work while we were down there. Maybe that was God's example of the fact that through him, and with hearts as true as the Guatemalans, all good things ultimately result. It's hard to sometimes tell with certainty what God's saying, but one thing's for sure. He was among us during that trip with the presence of this man minor, and through him we were all changed, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. I want to invite Brian Rayburn up to speak next. So would we welcome him up here?
Hi, so my name is Brian. As he said, I was on Group 1. Now, many people will tell you that you only see God completely when you get to know someone for a while at a trip, or when you step into this culture or into a place, or when you help someone for a while or more. But for me, this wasn't the case at all. Now, don't get me wrong, on the first day, as we entered rural Guatemala, I thought to myself, I didn't really see that much difference, you know? You see people with businesses, corporations, people driving around their families, trying to go to work. But soon, after a long drive, we would get to our area where we were building the stoves. In this village, you see houses that aren't the best, with people living in areas that give them malnourishment, not the best living situations, and many other things. But the first thing you notice isn't that. The first thing you notice is an utter shock of yourself when you see the smiling faces of all the children and people there, with more enthusiasm than you can possibly imagine. I sat there thinking, how can these people be so happy? They don't have everything that we have, but yet despite all this, they have pure joy and bliss. Soon you figure out that they find joy in the smaller things. They find joy in the games, friends, family, and more. The fact that they don't have much items or materials does not deter them from giving us a grand greeting, though. Soon they greet us with enough firecrackers to make a person go deaf, and enough Coke to make you sick to your stomach. Maybe that's just me, though. But first, a little context. If you look, we had a group of 21 people. With a group of 21 people, that means they spent around 60 quetzales on these Cokes. As Cameron said, that was a lot of money for them, because you look at the price, and the average person in Guatemala makes 40 to 50 quetzales a day. So they spent a day's pay just to give us a nice greeting. Soon after seeing this wonderful greeting, you go through all the smiling faces of the mothers, fathers, and children, and we saw through their emotions and actions that just because they didn't have much, they were never alone. They had God with them at all times, and they had much more than we had with things like that. Now, just because it didn't take me long to see all this wonderful love that they shared doesn't mean it stopped there. As we went to build our stoves, we came to our second one, and we began to meet the second wonderful and delightful family. And yet again, we were greeted with complete honor, like another member of the family. As our walk continued, they continued to bring us bananas, fruit, Coke, crackers, and more snacks, treating us like we were the best people and helping them so much, even though we were getting so much help from them, being the wonderful people that they are. Now, seeing this great generosity, we continued to meet our family, and as we continued, we played with the children through coloring books, bouncy balls, chalk, and more. They had no problem playing with us, sharing with us, and even at the end trying to give us the things that we gave them back, which is such a big deal because it's something they don't get very often. But after we told them that they were able to keep the toys and other things that we were playing with, they were completely ecstatic. When they learned all this, they were the most wonderful people in the world, especially with all they had given us joy, helping us with the project and more. And as we continued to talk with our families, for our second family, we learned that the spouses had three children, 2 boys and a girl. The father worked in the field, collecting the cocoa beans for coffee, and the woman made tortillas. Now, speaking as someone who attempted to make tortillas, it takes a lot of skill and talent that I didn't have. But we soon learned that even with all these hard jobs that they have to do, the first thing you realize is no matter how much they have troubles, they have to work, they deal with the smoke and everything else, they're always smiling. And you just wonder, how can someone smile so much with all this going on, all the problems they have? And you quickly realize that it never really mattered what problems they had there, what items they had. They always had God. And with the children and Masons and families smiling, you realize that God is all they needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And so we had 2 youth trips that obviously went in the middle of July. The last trip just got back last Sunday. We also had 2 adult trips that happened in January. So I want to invite Carl Boschart, who was on one of those trips, to come forward now to share with us his experience. And this is from the money that we raised to build the water tank. So this is a group that was able to help build that. So Carl, you can come forward now.
Good morning. Kingswood supports Transformational Journeys, an organization whose mission statement is to introduce individuals to experiences that can inspire compassion, develop understanding, and promote generosity through mutual service with people of other cultures. I participated in the trip to Guatemala in January of this year that was led by this organization, and at least from my experience, I would say mission accomplished. Transformational Journeys is good at what they do. I was impressed with the orientation that they provided us in advance, which prepared us well for what to expect, what not to expect, and educated us on some of the cultural aspects of the region where we would be and Guatemala. For the week that we traveled, there were only 4 of us, aside from Candace, our mission leader, who met us in Guatemala and spent the week with us and was our translator. With such a small group, I was worried initially how much we would be able to accomplish, but it actually made it easier for things like getting through the airport and traveling between locations and getting a table at a restaurant. We worked in the village of San Juan El Mirador, about a half-hour south of the town where we stayed. To get there each morning, we would ride standing up in the back of a pickup truck, holding on for dear life. Our job was to help finish constructing a spring-fed water system that included a tank, a filter box, a pump house, all made from concrete poured by hand. The work site was about a half a mile from the village up a mountain stream in somewhat of a rainforest. There were no roads for vehicle access. Everything needed to be carried by hand, bags of concrete, sand, equipment, supplies, tools, food, beverages. We worked with local Guatemalan masons that were hired by Transformational Journeys, as well as resident volunteers that provided some of the sweat equity that they require for such a project. It was exhausting, back-breaking work, and as for me, I loaded up on my ibuprofen at the beginning and end of each day. By the end of the week, the construction work was essentially complete, and I was amazed at what we had accomplished and learned. Our hotel was in San Lucas Tolaman, a town on Lake Atitlan that sees very few tourists. The hotel was run, as you heard, by Marbila and Philippe, a lovely couple who welcomed us into their family. The rooms were clean enough, but very basic, with not much more than a bed, a bare light bulb in the ceiling, and a minimal bathroom. Sheets and towels were washed by hand in a concrete basin and hung on a rooftop clothesline to dry. The hotel had a very modest kitchen and dining room that served as the only real gathering place, where Marbila fixed us breakfasts and dinners, as well as meals for her own family. And at dinner each evening, we would reflect and share our thoughts from our experiences each day. We did share a few laughs, like the fact that a couple of us kept forgetting you're not supposed to flush toilet paper down the toilets, or the time that I finished the water bottle of a complete stranger, thinking it was mine, after trying to be so careful about not drinking water that wasn't safe to drink. Or the time on a warm day that Ruth Anderson proclaimed in Spanish that she was hot. which amused the Masons because she had used the wrong Spanish word for the wrong type of hot. A number of cultural activities had been arranged for us to participate in, and we experienced the food, the crafts, the rich culture that Guatemala has to offer, as well as the climate and breathtaking scenery of the mountains, the lakes and highlands. But we also saw extreme poverty where people struggled to keep a roof over their head. Often a home was a basic unfinished wooden or concrete structure with a dirt floor or even just a lean-to. Sanitation and health care are not accessible to everyone. Working conditions were rustic and crude, but I was impressed with how the Guatemalan people made the best of what they had, wasted very little, and like us, value their families and their faith in God. I found the Guatemalan folks to be truly appreciative of our contribution, even if it was for only a moment in time of the lives that they lead. A mission trip such as this is but one form of service that involves giving of one's resources, time, and talents. I believe that when God provides us with these gifts, they are meant to be shared. Yes, it sometimes requires taking time off work, coming up with funds to travel, and stepping out of our comfort zone. But I found this to be a very rewarding experience that I will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Our last speaker in this service will be Ruth Anderson. She can come forward, and she also was, as you heard, was on the trip with Carl.
Thank you, Carl, for that vignette. I omitted that in my repertoire. Good morning. As Pastor Clayton said, my name is Ruth Anderson, and I had the privilege of going on the adult mission trip to Guatemala in January. This was my third trip to Guatemala via Transformational Journeys, also referred to as TJ. In many ways, this trip was unique. Instead of building fuel-efficient stoves, we were going to help build a water tank for the community of San Juan El Mirador, where I had helped build stoves on another trip. It was also unique in that there were 4 of us who traveled there, 3 gentlemen and me, or as I fondly referred to us as Gladys Knight and the Pips. Or maybe I was the Pip. Shortly after our arrival in the village, we met with the village council, comprised of men of varying ages. Each one spoke and expressed his gratitude for the generosity of Kingswood, who without our help would never have been able to raise the funds needed to build such an extensive project. It was humbling to hear their kind words as well as rewarding. Each man thanked us and the previous group, comprised of some Kingswood members and friends, for taking the time to help their community. Since we weren't building a stove in someone's home, we didn't have many chances to interact with families. Instead, we worked side by side with the local masons from TJ, alluded to in several of the kids' speeches, and other male members of the community who needed to work so many hours on the project as part of their contribution to the water tank, because they don't have the money to give. They can give, as Carl referred to it, sweat equity. I was often the only female at the work site, which was never an issue for me. But when the local women would pass by to go wash their clothes down at the river, many times I would get interesting looks. One has to remember that Guatemala is a very patriarchal society, and women just don't do the kind of work we were doing. I always tried to smile and wave, and then I would get smiles and waves from them. Before the water tank could be built, an area known as a spring box had to be constructed. A spring box is a structure engineered to allow the groundwater to be collected from the natural spring that is there. It functions to protect the water from contamination and to filter the water before it will go into the water tank. The previous group had built the walls, and we helped finish them. Once finished, the springbox needed to be filled with all sorts of rocks, boulders, stones of varying sizes. By hand, we carried and filled the springbox with a minimum of 10,000 pounds of rocks, according to Candace, who's the head of TJ. Next, it was time to mix, by hand, of course, 35 bags of cement, countless buckets of sand and agates, and water, and then do a continuous pour that would create the concrete walls for the water tank. Everything is done by hand, and you may be thinking, wouldn't it be better and easier to have machines do the work? Machines would be very expensive, and there would be no way for the machines to get where we were working. We walked on a very narrow path to get there, and we worked in a relatively small confined area. So that answers the question that Pastor Clayton talked about last week, namely, I wonder why they do it that way, or isn't there a better, faster way? We worked outside in the full sun. Thank goodness there was an area with a homemade cover near the project to give us some respite from the heat. I applied plenty of sunblock as well as insect repellent, but apparently the insects, especially the biting ones, never got the memo they weren't supposed to bite. By the end of the week, I was covered in bites. Because we were such a small group, we did some very fun, interesting cultural events. One that really stood out for me was the night we were invited to a local home where a gentleman and his wife welcomed us so warmly. He is an expert basket maker and taught us how to make a small one. He was so kind and patient, as we certainly needed all the help and advice he was willing to give. Naturally, all of his baskets are made by hand. This is my basket, made by hand, and this is not going to be my second job. Hours and painstakingly hard on your hands. I don't know how he does it, but it's amazing, and they actually look pretty good, but this is mine. As I reflect on this trip and the others, I think of the kindness and happiness that the people of Guatemala have shown to us. We were welcomed without hesitation. They are proud, hardworking people who love their families and want the best for them, just like we do. They are very generous with what they have, not only sharing with us, but also with members of their community. Luke 12:48 reminds us, to whom much is given, much will be required. If we've been blessed with talents, wealth, knowledge, time, etc., it is expected that we benefit others. On behalf of the wonderful people of San Juan El Mirador, I thank you again for your generosity so that the water tank could be built. Amen.
Thank you all for your stories and everything that we were able to do while we were there. Would you hold out your hands for this benediction? Kingswood Church, may you go from this space remembering Christ's love and hope and peace available to all. May these stories of service and faith and mission trips remind you that all of us can share Christ's love to each and every person that we come in contact with. Amen. Would you join in our closing song together now?